If you have any questions about anything you're seeing or anything I'm talking about, then just feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question, or just type it in the chat if the microphone is not good enough. Don't wait for me to stop and ask whether there are any questions, although I'll try to have some time at the end. So let's get started. As you probably know, Agora is now 3 years old and some months, and we're growing very rapidly. We're already in over 70 countries with, well, this information is obsolete anyway, because new clubs are popping up every day. And we're focusing on growth right now. We want to have representative clubs in every single country so that we can reach the people in them. Now, the core educational mission or goal of Agora is leadership training. Leadership training, not from a theoretical perspective, but from a practical viewpoint. And meaning doing things, not only reading about it. Learning through practice. And there are three legs or auxiliary, let's say, educational paths that are absolutely indispensable to leaders. And those are public speaking, critical thinking, and debating. I want to go into deeper detail about each of them. Most of them are clear. I just want to say a couple of things about uh, any of them. And if you want more details, there are some general trainings about Agora that we organize periodically that are much longer than an hour. And you can hear about each of those topics in depth there. And the recordings are, as always, on YouTube for past sessions. So public speaking is basically the ability to articulate a message and to transmit it properly in front of an audience or public. Being able to elicit emotions in other people, being able to express yourself, being able to defend your viewpoints, being able to have a clear single message and calling to action so that people can follow you. Although people usually think or associate public speaking with speaking in front of an audience, the fact is that as you learn public speaking abilities, you will notice that your general communication skills improve, not only in front of an audience, but in specific context, even in on one-on-one interactions, like when you're talking to your boss or to a prospective employee, or whether you're seeking funds for your startup, or whether you are in a small party, or even talking to your partner. Public speaking skills are essential because they basically teach you how to communicate properly and effectively. Critical thinking. Critical thinking is the ability to discern what information is true from what information is not so true or directly false. Unfortunately, we live in a world where there are a lot of fake news out there, and that's an understatement, saying a lot. We are literally inundated by them. And in Agora, what we do is instead of telling you what's true and what's not true, or what sources are good and what sources are bad, we give you the tools so that you can make that decision for yourself, so that you can learn to analyze the information that you receive, so that you can learn to check whether the arguments that you're receiving are consistent, whether they are logically coherent, whether they make any sense, whether you are being manipulated. And that's indispensable for leadership, because as a leader, you will have to make a lot of decisions. Actually, leading is about deciding almost constantly. But for making decisions, you need to have proper information, and you need to know what information is true from what information is false. So you need to have the tools when someone comes with a statistic or a graph or a chart or with a claim or a picture. You need to have the ability to tell, okay, this is true, this is not true. Are there any other possibilities? You need to be able to analyze critically and skeptically every information that you receive. And debating is about, well, the word says it all. about being able to defend your viewpoints in front of other people that have differing viewpoints, and to do that in a way that is logical, that is argumentative, and that is not emotional or insulting or name calling or resorting to techniques that really don't uh, contribute to you looking good in front of others or uh, advancing your argument. So all these things are what we teach in our educational program. Now, how does all this work? As you probably know already, in Agora, there are no teachers as such in the clubs. There are no experts. We don't hold online trainings about, let's talk about body language. We don't have training sessions, except maybe on some topics like evaluation, which are critical for the system. In Agora, the learning process is that you learn or you study our educational materials. They are divided into projects. Then for each of the projects or each part of the project, because there are many projects that are divided in 2 or 3 parts and each part has to be done in a different meeting. But for each part or each project, you prepare something. That something, it depends on the activity. It can be a speech, it can be a community project or a part of a community project. It can be an activity in the club, it can be a role in the meeting. It can be many things. You prepare that. You prepare that by yourself or using a mentor. The mentorship manual, we published it like 3 weeks ago, I think. And for review and for feedback, and we are going to make it official like probably next week. Then the critical part is that you execute that thing, the practice part. You do that in front of the club. If it is a speech, you deliver a speech in front of the club. If it is a role in a meeting, you perform that role in the meeting. If it is an activity in the club, you lead that activity. Well, the only exception is that if it is a community project, we'll publish the manual soon about that. Then you obviously execute the community project outside of the club, but then present a report in the club. And now the critical thing that actually helps everyone improve, apart from being able to practice that and deliver something in front of a group of people, is the feedback that you get. The feedback is the opinion of other members of the club about how they received your project, your speech, or your activity. And now there are usually 2 questions here. Whether this works as a learning process, considering that there are no teachers. And the second is how to do evaluations. Regarding the first part, I usually like to make the analogy of a cooking club, or imagine that you want to learn how to cook. There are 2 approaches. You can go to a master class or a workshop or a seminar by a famous chef, spend a lot of money, and spend 1 week or 3-4 days cooking intensively, and that's it. And hopefully, whatever you take out from that seminar is what you have learned. That's one approach. The second approach is I sign up to a cooking club, and every single week I'm going to read a recipe, I'm going to study how to do it, and I'm going to cook that dish for my fellow members of the club. And everyone will taste that dish, and they will give me their feedback. And I will do that week after week after week after week. So which of the 2 approaches gives better results at the end of the day? Well, research shows that the second approach is much, vastly more effective in creating good chefs in this case. Meaning, and that's universal actually for any skill, whether you want to play soccer or tennis or play the piano or skate on ice, whether you want to be, I don't know, a movie director, a photographer. The only real thing that will teach you and that you will make you become a professional one is actually doing that thing many times, practicing, getting feedback from others, getting opinions, and constantly improving. You can go to 1,000 classes watching about how people play the piano. That won't help unless you actually sit and do it. And the same is here. for public speaking and leadership. Our clubs, the goal of our clubs is providing a constant environment because clubs have to meet periodically. So you have like a meeting every week or every 2 weeks. That depends a bit on the club. And it's an environment that is friendly, that is supportive, that encourages you to have success. And it's an environment that is safe for you to practice those skills without being hurt, without being, I don't know, booed from the stage because someone doesn't like your message. You can experiment. And that's the whole point. You practice, practice, practice. You obviously have to study our materials, otherwise it's pointless. If you just go there without reading anything and do the same thing week after week, you won't improve either. And then the second part is what I mentioned about the opinion of others, the evaluations. Now, the evaluations that members perform on other members are not academic evaluations. They are not like, oh, you passed the exam, or you didn't pass, or I'm giving you a 6 or a 7, or whatever score you can think of. When someone evaluates someone else's performance, usually it's a speech. When you start your club, you will be mostly doing public speaking things. Leadership will come a bit later, debating and critical thinking as well. So initially, you will be doing a lot of public speaking, and you will be receiving evaluations from your peers. Now, evaluations are opinions. They merely express how the person that is evaluating you received your speech. As simple as that. And the goal of the evaluations is both to motivate the speaker and to give him points of improvement. So an evaluator should never fall into the two extremes of saying, wow, your speech was terrible, I didn't like it, it sucked, because you depress the poor guy that spoke in front of you, and he's never going to come back to the club probably if you hit him so hard. Plus, the kind of feedback that you just gave, like saying, I didn't like your speech, it was terrible, it's not really useful because you're not specifying what you didn't like, and you didn't offer any suggestion for improvement. An evaluation, and that's super important, an evaluation has to be objective, has to be specific, very important. You can't say, I didn't like your speech. No, you should say, I didn't like when you mentioned this and this and this, or I didn't like when you made this gesture, or whatever. And it has to be actionable. It has to offer some suggestion. I didn't like that you were walking all the time around the stage, speaking, looking at the floor, for example. I would recommend that you look at the audience, and especially at, I don't know, the left part, because you constantly looked at the right part. Something like that. And now, usually people ask, how is it possible to evaluate others when they may be more advanced than you? For example, you just come to a club, you're a new member, you're just starting the educational program, and there are members that have been there for, like, I don't know, 2 years, 3 years. In the case of Agora, that's a possibility. How are you going to evaluate them? And I always use, again, the same analogy. Imagine that you go to a movie, or you go to a restaurant or a cafe, and then after you leave, you do have an opinion on what happened inside. You can say the coffee was cold, or the coffee was great, or the service was bad, or this fish was raw, undercooked, or too salty, or the waiter was impolite. Or in the case of a movie, I didn't like the acting, or I loved the acting, but I didn't like the script because of this, because it was very predictable. I mean, you do have an opinion on all that as a customer that received that product or that service. Even though none of us is a movie director or a professional actor or a cook or a chef or a waiter, we do have opinions on things that we receive. And that's exactly what an evaluation is. Even if it's the first time you go to a movie, you still have an opinion on the movie after that. So that's the whole point of evaluations, not giving like an academic observation of, oh, your speech should have followed these academic rules in order to be good. No, it's just your opinion. Because at the end of the day, public speaking is speaking for the public at large. It's not speaking for Agora. It's speaking for the world at large. And the world at large doesn't care about Agora at all, for now at least. So it's just people giving your opinion on how you did. And as a speaker, you should be prepared to receive contradictory evaluations. Sometimes you will hear that at the same meeting from different people. You spoke too fast or you spoke too slow. And well, it's up to you which opinion and which suggestions you take. I also want to mention that as bad as it is to say, "Wow, you did terrible. I didn't like your speech at all," the other extreme is also very bad, like saying, "Oh, you were great. You're fantastic. I liked your speech," and that's it. No, that's also completely useless. First of all, because if everything was so perfect, then what am I doing in the club? People come to the club to learn. They don't come to socialize. Although that's also a possibility after the meeting, but the main goal of the meetings is educational. So people are there to learn and to improve. If you tell everyone that everything is perfect, well, that person didn't learn anything in that particular project. And also, what I mentioned is useless because it's the same it has the same problem as the criticism. It's unspecific. If you just say I loved your speech, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't say what exactly you liked. So that person doesn't know what part he can reuse for next speeches, what part, which are his strengths when speaking. If instead you say, for example, I loved the way you moved your hands while you were enumerating the problems that we have in our city. Oh, that's something specific. That's about his gestures. So that's useful. He knows that, oh, my gestures are good. I can repeat them in the next meeting or maybe improve on them. So that's fundamentally the way in which uh, people learn in Agora clubs. Is this effective? Oh, yes, I can tell you. If someone if the club is consistent, if the club meets with a lot of frequency, and if people are constant, the improvement is vast and immediately noticeable. You won't even have to be there more than 2 or 3 months in club meetings, as long as you attend, I insist, regularly and do things regularly. I mean, not just go to the club meeting to sit there and listen. No, you have to participate. You have to take part. And if you do that after 2 or 3 months, I suggest that you actually do a recording or that you talk to your friends, meaning remember how I am now, compare how I will be in 2 or 3 months, and you'll notice that the improvement is great. Now there are several core principles that we enforce very strictly. Those are core principles for clubs. Some of them are also applicable to members, but all of them are applicable to clubs. First of all is the neutrality principle. Neutrality means that the club as a whole or the foundation, Agora Speakers International, cannot promote any particular political, religious, social, moral, economic viewpoint. It cannot promote other products or services. It cannot promote other organizations. All clubs and the foundation itself are neutral. This means that even if all the members agree to, I don't know, that let's say freedom of speech is important, the club cannot have an opinion on that. The club cannot say your club a leadership de Cameroon cannot say we endorse freedom of speech. No, because that's a political opinion after all. I mean, yeah, we can all agree that that's important, but that statement, official statement from a club, can cause problems to other members in Agora in countries that are a bit more restrictive. So we are strictly an educational foundation, and we focus on education, and we don't have opinions. The club, I mean, and the foundation on social issues or moral or religious. This doesn't mean, and this is important, this doesn't mean that individual members cannot have that opinion. In fact, it's the opposite. We encourage individual members, every member of clubs, to have strong opinions about the things that they consider important, to have strong opinions on politics, to have strong opinions on religion, to have strong opinion on human rights, whatever their topic of interest is. And they should be free to express those opinions, let's say, as passionately as they want in their speeches. So if you want to speak about a particular religion in your speech, by all means do it. If you want to speak about a political party in your speech, by all means do it. If you want to speak about a moral issue, you're welcome passionately in the speech about the things that matter. But I insist, the club as a whole is neutral. And this neutrality principle ties a lot with another principle that is tolerance. Members in clubs should be tolerant with in terms of other opinions, even if they completely disagree with them, even if they, I don't know, they feel offended by them. The proper way to react to an outrageous opinion that you're listening is to listen and then prepare your own speech or do a debate and discuss it. It is not acceptable in an Agora club for someone to react emotionally when he hears something that he doesn't like, or much less violently, or I don't know, standing up and leaving. That's unacceptable for an Agora member. Everyone should, everyone has the right to express their own opinion, whatever it may be. I'm not saying that you should respect that opinion. There are opinions that I don't respect at all. For example, if someone comes and says the Earth is flat, and there are a lot of people thinking that actually, and surprisingly, I don't respect that. I mean, I tolerate that. It's your right to have that opinion. I think you're deeply mistaken, but it's your right. You can come to an Agora club, give a speech about how passionately you believe that the Earth is flat. But of course, first of all, I won't respect that, and probably we're going to have a debate, and we're going to have, or I'm going to deliver a speech opposing you. But what I won't do is, for example, censor you, like saying, no, you don't have the right to talk about the flatness of the Earth. You cannot give that speech. No, everyone should be able to give their opinion in the projects. And in fact, one important thing, by the way, about evaluations is that evaluations are never on content, except in some specific projects. And in those projects, it is specifically said that you can evaluate the content, mostly in the critical thinking path. But uh, when we're speaking about the basic educational path, for example, and none of the projects should be evaluated on content. So if someone comes on stage and gives a speech saying that the Earth is flat, he should be evaluated only based on the delivery of the speech. You will see in the different projects that there are different criteria. They could be vocal variety, they could be speech structure, they could be, I don't know, rhetorical devices or use of language. There could be many things. But what an evaluator can never do is say, I disagree with what you said, or this is not so, I think otherwise. An evaluation is an opinion on the delivery of the speech. It's not a debate, it's not a discussion. Which, by the way, puts the tolerance thing to the test, because if someone comes on stage and says that, well, I don't believe that the Holocaust happened at all, well, it's difficult not to get emotional about that sometimes, or some other war that caused a lot of suffering. But still, you have to be able to react calmly. And in fact, this is the best way to counter those, like, let's say, outrageous opinions. If someone reacts emotionally, or if someone just, I don't know, starts shouting or becomes violent or leaves, then in fact he is supporting with his actions the other opinion, the opinion that he didn't like, and he causes it to be even more popular. Now, another principle is equality, meaning that clubs cannot discriminate based on any criteria. Be that, I don't know, physical disabilities or sex or gender or age or, I don't know, gender identity, whatever, race, ethnicity, social origin. There's only one thing that is implicitly allowed to discriminate, and it is that, well, if your club uses English as the language, which by the way is not compulsory. I mean, you can do in your club. There can be clubs working in any language that you want to. We recommend that you don't mix languages in a single club, because maybe not everyone knows the 2 or 3 languages that you are using. But if you want to have a club in French, for example, that's fine. If you want to have a club in Portuguese or Spanish or German or any local language, that's perfectly fine as well. No, the only thing is that our educational materials are not translated into every single possible language, at least so far. But we're working slowly in terms of making them available to a wide number of languages. So if a club works in English, for example, then okay, yeah, it is okay to discriminate, saying that you need to know English to be a member of the club. That's fine. That's like understood. That kind of discrimination, so to say, is okay. Now, another core principle is that all clubs must be non-profit. You can collect fees in your club, especially for sustaining yourself, but you may not use the fees for profiting any particular person. All the clubs and the foundation itself are non-profits. And then another core principle is intellectual honesty. One thing we have in our legal bylaws is that we actively support this scientific method, we actively support science, and we actively support, let's say, the promotion of science, especially among the youth, as a way to understand the world we live in and as a way to improve the well-being of mankind and technological progress as well. We consider that absolutely important for everyone. So intellectual honesty is all about having an open mind, being able to hear other ideas and examine your own ideas critically and skeptically, like not having a fixed idea thinking that you're right and there is absolutely nothing that can change your mind. That's not being intellectually honest or open-minded. And that's hard. That's hard. Being able to examine your own ideas and being able at some point of saying, like a scientist, well, there is enough evidence against what I believed in, so maybe I should change my opinion, and that's fine. Changing your opinion is perfectly fine. In fact, one of the things we want to teach in Agora is that it's perfectly okay, it's perfectly right to be wrong about something. And in fact, if you admit that you were wrong, instead of just sticking like a donkey along the path, or like a lemming until you fall off the cliff, then you become a better leader. Because leaders that admit that they made mistakes, and leaders that learn from those mistakes, of course, or that they admit that they were wrong and change their course, they are much more respected and much more effective and much more loved and much more natural. We all make mistakes. And just because you made a mistake or you thought something, but it turned out to be something else, and you admit that, that doesn't make you a worse person. It's not associated with your personality at all. In fact, it makes you a better person, being able to admit, uh, let's say, incorrectness in your own beliefs or mistakes. So intellectual honesty for us is very important. And by the way, intellectual honesty also means that members do not manipulate others, because there is a lot of fake news out there already. There's a lot of manipulation out there already. So we don't want to contribute to increasing that. Our members are expected to behave in an intellectually honest way. Now, there are several what we call operational requirements that all clubs need to meet, but for the first year, you can just ignore them, more or less. I mean, within limits. Just be aware that they exist. After I share the slides, you can click on the link or you can check on the wiki. But the point is that, for example, your club does need to make a number of debates per year, like 4 at least, because if you don't do any debates in a year, well, the whole point of part of the program is lost. But as I say, during the first year, until the club is stable, you can just ignore them. Now, what happens in a club meeting? Club meetings are structured, meaning they do have sections. Each section is known in advance how long it will last. And there is an agenda that is known as well in advance. So when people come to a meeting, they know what will happen, in what order, who will do it, and how long each section will take. The agenda needs to be organized before time, before the meeting. And I want to stress that especially. Meetings should not be improvised. If you improvise, it's a waste of time. Yes, you socialize, you have a good time, but that's not the point of Agora. I mean, for having a good time, you don't need so much formality and you don't need all of this. You just meet with a group of friends and that's it, period. Remember, the goal of meetings is learning, so it has to be a structured activity. So there is a meeting leader that is usually the one that leads the meeting, as the name implies, that gives the floor to each of the different speakers. And by the way, each of the rows is documented on the wiki. You should be using the wiki constantly. And I recommend that you, although there is a big temptation of printing out a lot of things and just, I don't know, having it there as some sort of book, I advise against that because we are constantly improving the wiki and we are constantly adding things. So the best approach is just before, I mean, like a week before the meeting or several days before the meeting, if you know that you're going to lead the hot questions section, or if you know that you're going to present or be a timer or be a grammarian or present the thought of the day, then just go to the wiki and read that part. Hopefully in the future, in the very near future, we'll have video tutorials about that, but for now we have only written documentation, so we'll have to it will have to be enough for now. So each of the sections has one person that is responsible for that section. And then we have what we call transversal rows, or rows that encompass or affect all the sections. And the usual tool with which you will start are the timer that times how long each section is, and the grammarian that monitors the use of the language. So the goal of the timer is making sure that the meeting doesn't go over time, and also training people to develop some sort of internal feeling of time or internal sense of time, because in the real world, when you're speaking to a public at an event, if you go over time, bad things will happen. And these bad things can be that the organizer won't invite you anymore, or that other speakers will be mad at you because you ate into their time, assuming that you are not the last, or simply that they will cut off your mic and you won't be able to say anything more. So if you had the time to transmit your message, fine. If not, too bad. So people that are into public speaking need to develop an internal sense of time. And the timer has some signals that you can read about in the documentation about how that flow is performed. And the grammarian, as I said, monitors the use of language, so that, for example, at the end, he can provide a report about the good things that you use. So, for example, a particularly successful or appropriate idiom or phrase or a saying or quote or even word, a word that is not commonly heard, but you used it very appropriately in your speech. That's worth mentioning in the grammarian report. And also, the grammarian has two additional tasks. One of them is to count the what we call parasite words, or ums and ahs, and those are things. Those are like, yeah, parasites is the name really, that people that are beginning in public speaking do a lot. For example, when they don't know what to say, they just start making or start making long vowels, like, and I will say that, or they have just parasite words that repeat over and over, clutch words that repeat over and over again, like da 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 da, so. These are very common, and it's interesting because each language has its own set of parasite words that are used frequently. So the goal of the grammarian is making sure that people eliminate those from their speech. And one more thing that the grammarian does is propose the word of the day. Well, it's called the word of the day, but it can be the idiom of the day or the phrase of the day or the expression of the day. And it's something that is presented at the meeting itself. It's not known in advance. And the goal is that each speaker, not only those that are doing prepared speeches, but anyone that is speaking in front of the club, should try to incorporate that word into their speech. And this has two goals. First of all, you learn new words. That's the obvious one. And the second one is that you come to the meetings without memorizing your speech, because memorizing a speech is not a good idea in public speaking. Maybe you can memorize the beginning and maybe the final two sentences or things like that, but it's one of the absolutely important things in public speaking is that you are natural, that you have your own natural style. Don't try to be like someone else, imitating someone else. I mean, you can learn from other great orators, of course, but don't try to be them, because they have a particular environment, they were born in a particular place and in a particular time, and they're a product of their environment. You cannot be them, no matter how hard you try. At most, you will become a bad imitator. Everyone has to develop their own natural style, and there is not a single style that is successful. Of course, there are some techniques that need to be learned, but your style is yours. And if you memorize a speech, you will definitely not sound natural. You will sound like robotic. You will sound like someone that, well, is coming on stage and dumping the speech on the people without caring about their reactions. A speaker should be flexible. And the problem if you memorize a speech is that if you get distracted by something, and in the real world there is always something happening when you speak in public, if you get distracted, then probably you'll be blocked. You become blank. You forget where you were in your speech. You'll probably repeat a section, and it will be a disaster. So, having a word of the day, which you don't know what it's going to be, and that you have to incorporate. Well, of course, the grammarian doesn't kill people when they don't use the word of the day. It's frustrating, but it's okay. I mean, if someone doesn't find a way to use the word of the day, that's perfectly fine as well. But everyone should try to add the word of the day on the fly without preparation. Now, there can be other roles more specific when you are more advanced, but at first you should begin only with the timer and the grammarian. Other things like body language evaluator, listening evaluator, and many other roles you can add later once you know. Be aware that it's impossible to know everything about Agora like in a month. We have grown a lot. We're much more complex than we were a year ago or 2 years ago. So it does take time, but that shouldn't prevent you from starting. As I mentioned before, a critical part of all this whole system is the evaluations. Every section has an evaluator. It doesn't matter what section that is. There is an evaluator that expresses his opinion on the speech, and the evaluation is done in public in front of the club in the same meeting, so that the whole club can learn, not only the person that is being evaluated. Now, as I mentioned, there needs to be an agenda. This is a template we have, although, well, there are several templates on the website. You can use the one that you like the most, or design your new one altogether, up to you. A meeting usually is between 1 and 2 hours. We don't recommend more, otherwise it becomes very boring. At least the educational part. After you finish the meeting, you can, I don't know, go have dinner or drinks or just party and do that for 6 hours. That's fine. But the educational part, 2 hours, 2 hours and 30, that's like a maximum. And as I mentioned, all the sections are timed with a minimum and maximum time. And the timer is in charge of signaling all that. Now, there are a huge number of sections that you can have in a club meeting. Here are, well, let's say 80% of them. And the sections have different educational goals. Some of them teach public speaking, some of them teach leadership, some of them teach critical thinking, and some debate and argumentation. So you have, for example, prepared speeches, which are one of the most common, or improvised speeches, what we call hot questions, it's the same, or icebreakers, language games. Language games, for example, are for improving your proficiency in a different language than your native one. And, well, you can read about all this in the manual. Now, how is a typical meeting structured? This is a recommendation, but since you probably don't have any experience in any other previous clubs or things like that, we recommend that you keep to it initially, and then you can start experimenting changes and see if something else works better for you. So usually the meeting leader will start the meeting, and he will talk a bit about the purpose of these meetings. Especially consider that in any meeting you can have new members, you can have guests, and you need to tell them what this is about, what they have come to, what they are getting themselves into. So you just talk about the general purpose of the club, what things happen in it. You talk a bit about the foundation, Agora Speakers International, how the club is part of it. You talk about like simple things, operational, like please turn off your mobiles, please don't leave or don't walk while the speaker is speaking, out of respect, wait for him to speak, don't interrupt, general things. Of course, this varies. I mean, if in a particular meeting there is no one new, there are no new members, there are no guests, then you don't need to spend like 4 minutes talking about Agora, because everyone knows what this is about. So this introduction should be no more than 2-3 minutes tops. And then the meeting leader will be introducing the different roles. So the meeting leader will introduce the timer, and the timer will come to the stage, and that is important. Everyone speaks from what we call a stage. It's not necessarily a stage like in the real sense of the word, but it's a separate area for speakers that is different from the place where the rest of the members are sitting. So no one speaks from their chair, because the goal is not speaking at a dinner party or at a dinner table, but in front of a public. So the timer comes up front and speaks about his role. He explains how he's going to time, why timing is important, etc., etc. Then the meeting leader introduces, and he goes back to his seat. Then the meeting leader introduces the grammarian. Like, for example, Annabelle is going to be our grammarian today. So Annabelle, I would like to invite you to come to the stage and tell us about your role. And then Annabelle would come to the stage. Everyone should clap, by the way. Clapping is very necessary in such class because many people are nervous, and clapping gives them a sense of encouragement, both when they are going to the stage and when they are leaving the stage. So the grammarian would talk about his role, would present the word of the day. He or she should also explain the word of the day, give examples of the usage. Well, all of that is detailed in the documentation, but still, I want to mention it now. And then for each section, the meeting leader will introduce first the evaluator of the section, because people need to know what are going to be the criteria for evaluation. So for example, if we have someone that is doing a project from the basic educational path, a project that is focused on, let's say, speech structure, then the evaluator should explain that. The evaluator should explain that, saying that John, for example, is going to do his third or fourth project, I don't remember which one it was, which is about speech structure. And John's goals are going to be to have a clear opening, a clear conclusion, to have clear sections in the speech, to have smooth transitions between the sections, all of that, so that the audience knows what they should be focusing on, not about just generic things. And then the meeting leader will give the floor to the speaker or the leader of the section specifically, and well, he will do his job, present a speech, lead improvised questions, whatever the section is. And then there will be a very small pause, maximum 1-2 minutes, during which the meeting leader will say, and now let's give feedback to John. Now, during those 1-2 minutes, the appointed evaluator will finish his evaluation, and the rest of the members will write a short one. One thing that I will need to say, although that's a minor detail, but the protagonist of a section is the person that is leading it. So the meeting leader once the meeting leader introduces that person, he should step away and remove himself from the stage. And then we have the conclusion, during which the meeting leader first calls the grammarian. The grammarian provides his report, like saying, John did this very well, I like this or that expression, or this or that expression was not very correct used. He also gives a report on how many times the word of the day was used by each participant. And the same happens for the timer. And then after that is concluded, the meeting leader will call what we call a meeting evaluator that provides the evaluation of the whole meeting. And the meeting leader also evaluates the evaluators. So for example, the meeting evaluator. So for example, the meeting evaluator could say, we started too late, please everyone, make sure next time to be on time. Or he can say, the venue was very noisy today. As a suggestion for improvement, we should try to find something else or something better, or come at a different time when there are not so many people. And he should also evaluate the evaluators, meaning, for example, I like how Patricia did her evaluation. She provided very specific examples of what she liked, and it was to the point. One thing I would improve, Patricia, is that, for example, in the goals of the project was to have smooth transitions between the sections, and you didn't mention anything about that. Things like that. And then, well, the meeting is over, basically, and you can do whatever you want. Now, for most of the sections, they can be they are not structured. They can be repeated over and over again by the same person, and it's okay. By the way, one thing I forgot to mention is that the roles in the different meetings are performed by different people every time. So it's not like there is one timer in the club and he's and poor guy, he's always the timer, and or someone else is the grammarian all the time. No, in each meeting there is a different meeting leader, there's a different grammarian, there's a different timer. How you assign the roles, that's up to your club. Usually people ask for volunteers at the end of one section, sorry, at the end of one meeting. It's a good practice to ask for volunteers for the next meeting. Like, okay, the meeting is over. Who wants to be timer next meeting? Who wants to be grammarian? Who wants to give a speech? Who wants to be, or whichever way you want to organize yourselves. That's really whatever works for you. The meeting leader, by the way, should be prepared in case of someone not showing up, and that happens constantly. Like, okay, John was going to be the grammarian, but he's not here, so I need to improvise. Can you be the grammarian? And he should pick anyone that is available. Ideally, there shouldn't be any people with more than one role in a meeting because everyone should have the opportunity to speak in a club meeting. But initially, when the club is small, then of course a person will be both the timer and the grammarian, or he will be both the meeting leader and the evaluator, things like that. Although it's not ideal, but of course, if there are not many members, there's no other way. So the prepared speeches, unlike any other activity, they are organized in what we call a path, an educational path. Because, for example, thought of the day or icebreakers, you can do them over and over and over again, and it's the same activity over and over again. The thought of the day is, well, the thought of the day. But prepared speeches, they follow a path, and that path is divided into projects, as I mentioned. Each project has some specific educational goals, and many projects have two or more parts, and each part has to be done in a different meeting. So, for example, many projects from the basic educational path, they have a speech analysis part in which you have to, it's also documented how to do that, where you need to find a speech that you like from someone else. Could be a politician, could be an actor, could be, I don't know, a scientist, someone from TED, anything you can find on YouTube. It doesn't matter. The speech doesn't need to be from someone famous. It just needs to be a speech that you like. And you analyze that speech from that particular viewpoint, meaning that if the project, for example, is about speech structure, opening, conclusion, sections in a speech, you analyze that speech from that viewpoint. And then a second part of those projects is usually doing a speech yourself. The topic or the subject of your speech can be anything you like. Remember what we spoke before. You can talk about anything you like, and others should be tolerant of your opinion. Well, there's one exception, though. I mean, you cannot talk about absolutely anything that you like. What we don't tolerate in meetings is hate speech. That is not allowed. I mean, someone coming and saying that, I don't know, all black people should be eliminated, or we should kill all Japanese, or things like that, that is not allowed. Speech that promotes or encourages violence or hatred against other people or collectives in general, that is not allowed. And in fact, the meeting leader should have the speech titles beforehand because they should be part of the agenda. I mean, in an agenda, you don't just say, John will have a prepared speech. No, there needs to be, the agenda should say what project John is doing and what's the title of his speech so that everyone knows in advance. And so there shouldn't be surprises at a meeting. And if someone comes with such a speech, it has never happened, by the way, but if it happens, that is not allowed, obviously. Violence and encouragement of violence. Now, after you finish the basic educational path, you have a lot of advanced paths that you can pursue. Each of them is in turn divided into projects. And they will be deployed soon because we need to first close the wiki so that it's accessible only to members. But after we close it, there are two or three of them that are completely finished, and the rest we will be developing in the future. But still, before that, since these are advanced paths, you have to finish, the person that wants to do them has to finish the basic educational path. And everyone moves along this basic educational path on their own timing and possibilities. So it's not necessary that everyone is on project 4, for example. In a meeting, Someone will be presenting a speech from project 10, someone from project 2, and actually that's fine. That's quite cool, listening to different things. Now, regarding evaluations, there are two evaluations that each speaker will receive. One is an evaluation from the appointed evaluator, from your appointed evaluator for that particular meeting. Again, the evaluator is the one that changes. It's not the same. You will not be having the same evaluator over and over again for every single meeting. Today is one person, next meeting is going to be a different person. So the evaluator will have a specific evaluation card that guides him as to what are the goals of this particular project and what he should be looking at. And the rest of the members and guests of the club, they can provide a general evaluation. We have some templates, you can design your own. The point is that they write something generic about your speech. And now, before I move on, I would like to show you where all of this is, because usually one of the main problems of starting is actually finding things, surprisingly. And the problem is that no matter how we do that, it's still apparently difficult. So let me share with you another screen. Give me a second, another window. Okay, this is our wiki, which I hope you know already. It's on wiki.agoraspeakers.org. And this is where you should be spending almost 95% of all your time, and 5% maybe in the chat that we have, which we need to promote a bit more. But the thing is, for example, the different meeting rows and meeting sections are all described here in meeting rows. So for example, if you're the timer of a meeting, then you should go to the timer part and and click on it and read how the timer does the timing. So you can get ideas, you can get, well, it explains how we use the different signals, what they mean, how to actually show the signals, how to write the report, and you have a lot of information here about how to be a good timer. Same if you're, I don't know, the meeting leader. Okay, so I'm meeting leader for next meeting. What should I do? Again, it's explained. Yes, I know that you have to read, but that's important. Leaders read. Leaders read a lot constantly. So if you're not willing to read, for sure I can tell you, you're not going to be a good leader ever. Now about the educational part, and well, different sections are also here. So for example, hot questions or today we travel to or things like that, everything is documented. Everything that can happen in a meeting is documented here. About the educational program, the basic educational path is located here. And when you click on it, you will see the different, well, the 16 projects that I mentioned. So you should start from the first project is actually just being the timer or the grammarian. That's enough. But then you start delivering speeches. And you should do them in order. So for example, okay, I already was timer last meeting. So today, next meeting, I want to give a speech and my project is number 2, speaking about the things you like. So you go here and you can see what are the learning objectives of this project, how much time your speech has. So a minimum of 2 minutes, a maximum of 4, and what you should be doing. And the important part is that at the end of each project, there is a section with information for the evaluator. So if I'm evaluating, for example, let's say that I'm evaluating project number 7 from someone, body language, then I would go here, I would read about what are the learning objectives, and then I would go here and see what are the evaluation cards. So for example, okay, speech delivery. And this is the evaluation card that the evaluator has to fill in. The design will change, but the essence is the same. I mean, there are a set of questions, like, for example, okay, this is the project about body language. So the questions relate to body language. Was it used effectively? Was it used appropriately? Were the gestures visible? Were they big? Were they appropriate? Were they synchronized with the speech? All of that, the evaluator should write and then present it to the club in a verbal evaluation. And this sheet of paper is given to the member so that he can improve. Obviously, the evaluation cards are different for each project. So for example, if someone is doing today we travel two section or meeting, which is quite a thing, by the way. It's a very socially oriented section. It's not about tourism or travel, despite the name, but it's chosen like that on purpose. Then, well, the evaluation card, this is the modern design, is focused on that in particular, not on structure or vocal variety or things like that. Now, you can find the generic evaluations and template here in what we call the branding portal. In the branding portal, you can download all sorts of logos, like on dark backgrounds, on clear backgrounds, black and white, only the square logo, only the flame, and especially things for club business. For example, well, agendas, like this one here, templates for the timer, evaluation forms, the new design or the old design, whichever you like, or you create your own. I mean, up to you a bit. If you need to print, I don't know, if you need to do presentations, then you have here our presentations in PowerPoint format in different languages. If you need to print, if you want to print business cards or flyers or things like that, you have them here. Business cards, brochures, different sizes and formats. There's one very important thing though. When you use any of these resources, especially when you create your own designs for anything, you need to be aware of what we call the brand guidelines. You should, the moment you start designing your own materials, you should read this guide thoroughly, because we do enforce that. I mean, how to use the logo properly, like don't make weird changes to the logo, don't rotate it, don't, well, and in general. So let me get back now to the presentation. I hope it's now clear where to find the things that you need to start to use in your meetings. It's not really absolutely necessary to print them out, or to print them in color. Sometimes it's just enough to just note them somewhere, maybe even electronically, or send it by whatever works for your club. Now there are we do have certificates, digital certificates and digital badges when someone finishes one of the paths, and we will be adding more badges for specific activities. So that's a task of the Vice President of Education of your club to notify us. For now, it will be a manual notification, but in the future, when we deploy our online management system, you will just go online and say, this member has completed all the 16 projects, so he should get a certificate. And we will email one. These are the things that we do in club. Now, outside of clubs, or when more than one club is involved, we do regional conventions, and we do have an international convention. Every year, the international convention is in a different country and in a different continent. So, for example, this September actually was in Lisbon, in Portugal, the first international convention. Next year is going to be in Nepal. And well, let's see after Nepal what comes. It's not going to be for sure neither the zone of India or Nepal, neither are probably Europe. It's going to be in a different place. And something that we're starting this next year are contests. We are going to have contests both at regional levels and at international levels about best educational speeches, best storytelling speech, best social awareness speech. We will publish the rules soon. Although I usually say that constantly, but people don't really believe it. Everything that we do in Agora is done really collectively. I mean, everyone is free, and we encourage everyone to offer suggestions and to criticize and to say, in fact, for example, the contest for best social awareness speech came because of a comment on a Facebook post that someone wrote. I've forgotten, apologies for that. I think it was her name. But it was a comment like, we should have this because it's important. And it was someone from an African country. I don't remember that. And that was right. I mean, it was an oversight not to have a contest on best social awareness speech, considering that we are a very social organization. So by all means, if you have ideas, share them. And by the way, regarding the sections of a club meeting, clubs, we encourage clubs to experiment new things, to try new sections, new ideas, and if they work, if you see that members improve and learn, then by all means share them with us, with Agora Speakers International, so that we can incorporate them into the educational program and make them available for all the other clubs. So you're free to experiment. At the beginning, I would recommend, though, that you stick to the standard ones and that you do the few that should be done properly, and then you can start like doing your own designs. Now we have a lot of presence. All the documentation is located on the wiki, as I showed before. We have a worldwide chat that is right now, well, not very popular. We didn't, the chat has existed only for a month and a half, so people are not very aware that it exists, but we will be encouraging more and more using it. Especially because for being on our online systems, for being on the chat and being on the forums, it doesn't require to have a Facebook account, and not everyone is right now very comfortable having a Facebook account. Some people prefer not to have one. Some people prefer not to share it if they have one, or keep it very private. Instead, using our own systems like the chat or the forums, allows us to include those people, because the only thing necessary for registration, well, people that have registered the club, they already know the procedure, but you only need to give your name, your email, and your country and city, and that's it. We don't ask for any other information, so that should be pretty basic. And we also want to get away from third-party dependencies, not to depend so much on Facebook or anyone else, because, well, I don't know, if Facebook decides tomorrow to shut Agora, the Agora groups, they can, and we cannot do anything about that. It's after all, it's a private business, Facebook. So that's why we're moving slowly away from them. Now, for the very first meetings, or the very first meeting, if you still haven't started, what we recommend is that you have only these sections, and that gives you a very basic meeting, but a very productive one. So you would have a prepared speech by someone. That someone would have to have a speech evaluation. You would have what we call minimal analytical reports team. Those are basically the timer and the grammarian. A thought of the day, and a section for improvised speeches. Improvised speeches is basically someone, the leader of the hot questions section, asking a realistic but unknown question to participants. Every participant a different question, so that people that come on stage during that section, they are forced, or they train in improvising, in speaking, thinking on their feet, as they say, as a theater, thinking quickly and being able to articulate a speech on a question they didn't expect. Now, the important part about these improvised speeches is that the question should be realistic. It shouldn't be something absurd. Questions should be something about scenarios that can happen to that person in real life. Like, for example, imagine you're at a job interview and the interviewer asks you this: what is your, I don't know, your worst trait? Or imagine you are talking to your partner and your partner says she's leaving. Or imagine that they should be things that can happen in real life, not things that are like, okay, imagine you're Superman. What would you do? Well, you're never going to be Superman, so that's like a pretty absurd question for that section. For that, those kinds of questions, though, are useful for the icebreaker section, where people break the ice, meaning that they become comfortable with each other. They put away their nerves. Those are funny questions that you can do in the icebreaker section. Like, imagine you had a superpower, or imagine you could travel in time. That's okay for the icebreaker sections. For improvised speeches, it should be something important and realistic. Now, if you have those sections, you will have a meeting that usually lasts for an hour and a half. An hour and a half because, well, with all the introductions and all the clapping and all the poses for evaluation, and people going to the stage and going away, it at the end it adds up to 1 hour and a half. Although the activities themselves, if you add the timings here, you will see that they only add up to an hour. So we would suggest this kind of agenda. I'll share the recording after that, so you can like watch it calmly. And you only need 8 people for that agenda. That's why our minimum number of people is 8. Although, well, if 6 people show up, or 5 or 4, then you will still have to carry on the meeting. The important thing, by the way, about being successful is being constant in your meetings. Having the meeting, despite, well, if only you show up, if only one person shows up, then of course there's no meeting. But even if 3 or 4 show up, you should try to have a meeting. And I'll explain a bit later about that. But for that particular agenda, with those very basic sections, you need only 8 people, nothing more. And each one has a different row and nothing is repeated. So that's absolutely great. Now, everything I always say about us, Agora, being free and without costs and all that, is only applicable for 2 types of clubs of the 4 that can exist. And those are open clubs, meaning that they are open to everyone, no restrictions. Well, they do need to speak the language of the club, as I mentioned before, but I don't need to, I don't know, as long as there is physical space in the place where the club is meeting, anyone should be able to come as a guest and register as a member. And public interest clubs are very specific clubs. We approve them on a case-by-case basis. And the idea is that although they have restrictions because of their circumstances, we still allow them to be free of any charges and fees and purchases and things like that. So what are public interest clubs? Clubs that basically perform a public service. For example, clubs in schools or universities or academies. These are free clubs, although they are restricted. A club in a school is only for students and teachers. A club in a university is only for faculty and students. A club in a government building, in a government institution, is only for civil servants. A club in a penitentiary is only for inmates, for prisoners there. So a club in a hospital, it's only for people that either work there or are patients there, not for a random person from the street. So despite the fact that those clubs are restricted, they are public, they serve a public interest, and they are free as well. But if someone wants to create a club only for the employees of his company, for example, that would be a corporate club. Or if someone wants to create a club that accepts only lawyers, or that accepts only members of a particular profession or association, that's fine, that's possible. But in that case, those clubs are not free. They need to pay both fees by member and for the club itself. And we do have a special youth program that we're developing right now, that is for kids in early school and preschool years, usually before 14, less than 14, 13 years. Anyone that is above 14, we think that they can perfectly well do the adult program. And now, regarding starting the club, the recipe for success is absolutely, and I would say most importantly, starting. A lot of clubs die. Well, they don't die, they are not even born. They don't manage to start living because people are looking for something perfect. They are either looking for the perfect venue, or the perfect number of people, or the perfect knowledge or preparation about Agora. And until they feel that they are prepared, like totally, which by the way never happens, the club won't start. And that's a mistake. You should start as soon as you have a basic understanding of what Agora does, as soon as you understand what the timer does, a meeting leader, as soon as you have the elements for a basic meeting, each of the rows clear, you should start. And yes, you will make mistakes. That's fine. You will make mistakes. It won't be perfect. Probably it will be a disaster the first meeting. Probably you will plan. I always use the example of Emmanuel Antwi, because when he started his first club in Ghana, in Accra, he was planning for an attendance of, I think, 10 to 12 people, and only 4 showed up. But he still held the meeting. There were different reasons for that. It was a rainy day, and people didn't understand exactly the meeting location, and they showed up in batches because they didn't get the timing right either. But he held to it, and he persevered. And now in Ghana, there are 8 clubs just in the framework of 2 months. So the whole point is starting, making mistakes, learning from them, obviously. I mean, if If everyone is confused about the location, then okay, that's a signal for the organizer. Maybe next time I should be more explicit. Add, I don't know, a Google link, a map to a link to Google Maps. Maybe I should clarify. Maybe I should post a picture of how the venue looks like from the outside so that people can find it. But don't try to anticipate what the problems are going to be. Don't try to solve problems in advance. Solve the problems when they appear, when you know that they are actual problems. Because many times people obsess about problems that they think they are going to happen, but that's not true. In the end, not only that you wasted time preparing for things that didn't happen, but what is worse, you didn't invest time in solving problems that did happen, that will happen. So the point is, start, have your club meetings, make the mistakes. Don't. I mean, it's obviously always good to try to avoid them, but it's inevitable. Don't take it like personally, or don't be frustrated if you make mistakes, because that's normal, and learn from them. You can learn from them. Also, ask for suggestions from the members of your club and also from the Agora community, because at this point, after 3.5 years almost, we do have some experience about running how clubs are run. So basically, that's what I wanted to share with you. By the way, this cycle, the recipe for success, is the same that we are doing in Agora. When Agora started 3.5 years ago, we didn't really have a lot. We didn't even have the full educational program or the full basic path. We just had a couple of projects, but we decided, okay, let's start anyway. Let's see what happens. Let's see how people feel about it. And we started, and we developed everything on the fly. There wasn't like a grand design about how to build Agora, like a vision of how it should be. There is a vision about what's the overall goal of Agora, but not the, I don't know, every individual path. Sorry, every individual step is not like a part of a grand design. There's no such thing. You constantly improvise. And that's one of the lessons of leadership. You have to be able to improvise a lot, because you can have the perfect plan, but the moment you step into reality, you'll see how it falls apart rather quickly, in fact. Which, by the way, doesn't mean that you shouldn't have any plan. You should plan minimally at least, but don't try to overdo it. Okay, so now if you have any questions, I'm available. You can either say them or type them in the chat. I hope that the main thing from this meeting, from this training session, is for you to know what you should do in your first meetings, because usually there is like, what should we? Okay, we have a club. Now what? What happens? We meet and what? So I hope that is more or less clear. There is the ambassador of Agora to Spain, Santiago Becerra. He usually likes to say that it's much easier when you actually do it than when you read about it or when you listen to these training sessions, because it looks like, oh, it's so complicated, but no, it's actually quite easy. Just do it.
Hello, Alex.
Hello.
Thank you. I think almost everybody is here right now.
Excellent.
We are very happy to have listened to you. We have taken note of everything, and so I don't know if any member here has any question.
I'll turn on the video for a while just so that you can see me, that I'm not a bot or
Okay.
or something.
Okay.
It's always more personal. I usually don't turn the video because, well, the data is, yeah.
Yes. Can you turn your video? Each of you, can you just turn your video? Let's just have a look.
Hey, that's great. I see a lot of happy faces and one very bored next to you.
Okay. All right. Can you see me here?
Yeah, I can see you. Yeah.
Okay, you can see me. Okay.
Yeah, I can. Okay.
So very happy.
Likewise.
This training with you.
Yeah.
So
Okay, let me turn it off because the bandwidth is probably going to suck your data plan.
Exactly. Thank you.
So, any questions? You can type them, you can say them. No, everything's fine. Okay, well, if you think of questions after that, you can always ask them in the groups or send me a private message. Just be aware that if we're not connected, then probably it will take me some time to see it, like a couple of days probably. But other than that, feel free to ask anything or send an email to info or even better, alex@agoraspeakers.org. That will be fine. But it's usually better if you just post a message in the Facebook groups, even in the international one, asking for advice, because you will get a lot of different opinions, not only mine. Okay, then, well, if there are no questions, thank you, everyone. And I hope to, well, there's one thing I wanted to mention. Although clubs can meet, wow, although clubs can meet with whatever frequency they want, we do recommend that you try to meet weekly. Meeting weekly makes things more difficult at the beginning because not everyone is going to be able to come every week. There is a temptation of meeting like once a month or 2 times a month, like every first and third Wednesday or every second and fourth Thursday. But that complicates things for everyone, because imagine that you are someone that wants to join that club, and he needs to start thinking, okay, today is Wednesday, but is it the first Wednesday? Is it the second Wednesday? What happens if it's always not clear. If you have a meeting like on a particular day every single week, then for everyone it's clear. Okay, today is Wednesday, there's a meeting in the club. So it will be more difficult in the beginning, the first, I don't know, 2-3 months maybe. But after that, your club will grow much faster and it will be much easier to manage than having, I don't know, a meeting every month or 2 times a month. So having said that, thank you, everyone. And, well, have nice meetings. Oh, great. You meet every Saturday. Oh, fantastic. Then share pictures. Share more pictures. Okay. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.